Well, it's just after midnight here, and the sun has officially gone down, I think. I think it's about as dark as it's probably going to get. You can see the sky is still tinging light blue a little bit, but yeah, I don't think it's going to get any darker. The sun's gone. Um, so, another big day today, did about 120k. So that brings me to about 720k from Trondheim now. So it's day seven. 3 days left, and that's good because I'm roughly tracking on time to finish in 3 days. So I should be able to catch my train back to Oslo on the morning of Tuesday. Now today was a roller coaster, as most of these days have been, but that's what makes riding a bike long distances so enjoyable. I guess you feel alive. So the morning started off quite slowly. I woke up in my tiny little cabin and had a bit of a headache. Didn't have a great sleep, unfortunately, because it was the first time I'd slept on a bed for a few nights, and I was hoping to have a good rest, but I didn't really get one for some reason. I guess maybe my body was wondering why I wasn't in a tent. But it was raining in the morning, so I kind of slowly got ready, had some breakfast, and kind of slowly packed my stuff together, hoping that it would clear a little bit, but it didn't really. So I set off in the rain, and kind of dreaded that the whole day was going to be riding in the rain, really. The owners kind of shook their hands and also their heads as I was leaving, as I seem to be getting a few of these looks lately when people see me riding around in the rain. And I had checked because pretty much like first thing I had to do today was catch a ferry, and I checked the ferry schedule as I was like having breakfast, and this one was not so regular. It's every couple of hours, so I had to quickly, when I saw that, quickly get everything ready, jump on the bike and go. And I just floored it as fast as I could to the ferry terminal. I got there about 10 minutes early, so just in time for that ferry. And I thought everything was all good until I sat down on the ferry and I was looking at the route for the day, and I was like, oh, there's another ferry coming up this afternoon. Maybe I should have a look at the ferry schedule for that one so this doesn't happen again. And I was looking at the ferry schedule, and turns out there's no ferry that runs there anymore. The ferry was cancelled. So I'm sitting on the current ferry towards this tiny little island, and the only way off the island was this ferry that I was planning to catch that doesn't run anymore. So at this point I'm like, well, what the hell do I do then? Should I just catch this ferry back to the mainland? Is there any point going to this island if there's no way to get off it? And then I was looking at ferries that I could catch from that port that I was at, and it seemed like the only place I could go was to Bergen. And I was thinking, well, should I just cancel the last 3 days of the trip and just finish it now then? And I realized I had quite mixed emotions about this. When I first thought of it, I was like, well, it was a bit of relief, to be honest. I guess everything's done. I don't need to, push myself the next few days to get it finished. I can relax. That was the initial thought, and then shortly after that, there was kind of this wave of almost disappointment. It's like, oh, I didn't get to, finish the adventure I was on, and I was quite sad about that. So I still wasn't really sure what to do at this point. The ferry arrived at the island, and I got off because I felt like I should, and I kind of pulled over at the information sign. There wasn't anyone there, but I managed to find a phone number, and I gave that number a call, and I spoke to some lady on the phone who, her English wasn't great, but she was very helpful. So we managed to get on the same page, and she told me that there's no ferry, but there was a kind of a passenger boat which goes that route instead. So great, I could still go. I didn't have to end the trip. But that passenger ferry only goes twice a day. It already missed the morning one, and there was one more in the afternoon at 4:30. So at this point, once again, the game was on for me to quickly ride across the whole island, get to the other side where the next ferry terminal was, and catch this boat at 4:30. And it was, I think it was 1:30 or maybe 2 at this point. So yeah, I wasn't exactly sure how long it would take me to get to the other side of the island, because there was another massive hill I had to climb. So the lady on the phone, she kept talking. I said, I really have to go now because I have to ride across the island. She's like, oh, okay, well, maybe you can do this. I'm like, I'm sorry, I really actually have to go. So ended up finishing that conversation with her rapidly, and then sped off up the hill. And it was actually such a nice ride. Just such a picturesque little island, full of just little island shacks, and then weaving around the different little channels of the island. It was just stunning, actually. And I wish I had a bit more time to enjoy it, but I was in such a rush. I just sped past all of it and tried to take it in as I could. Anyway, I ended up getting to the ferry terminal at 3 o'clock or something in the afternoon, so I had another hour and a half, heaps of time. And while I was waiting, I had had lunch. I was starving at this point. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, and listened to some podcasts about Chris Picard, who's a famous adventure and nature photographer, who I was recommended by a friend of mine, Alfred Minar, I think is his last name, or Alfie, who's also a very one of the world's best nature photographers, in my opinion. So check him out if you haven't heard of him. But he recommended this guy Chris Picard, who does a lot of photography of surfers in Iceland, which was quite unique. And he's just ridden the Tour Divide, which is known as the hardest bike race in the world. Goes from Banff in Canada all the way to Mexico. It's about 2,700 miles, I think. And to win this race, you got to kind of do it in about 14 days. So Chris described his experience doing this as a first timer and kind of still a newbie to the endurance racing sport. Describe experiences of his everything on his bike breaking, his bottom bracket, his pedals, his shoes, his brakes, everything just breaking in terrible muddy conditions. And actually a guy who I met in the Sydney to Summit, Jack, he did the Tour Divide this year as well, and it took him 25 days, and from what I saw, it was absolutely horrific conditions. So he did a phenomenal job to do it in that time, to even finish it. So great job to Jack. I think Chris ended up doing it in just under 15 days, but he basically nearly killed himself in the process, I think. He did the first 72 hours of the race with 1 hour of sleep or something stupid. He rode basically 70 hours straight without sleeping, and then just slept in a bush on the side of the road or something. Like just crazy shit these guys are doing. So I listened to that podcast, and this has really seeded the idea in me of, I've been thinking about it for a while, of doing the Tour Divide potentially next year. So this idea has been bouncing around in my head quite a bit today. And so once I got on this ferry, eventually did arrive at 4:30. I caught it to the other side and hopped back on, and then it was time soon after that to climb probably the biggest hill of the trip so far. Was 600 meters elevation, and it was tough. Took a couple of hours to do that hill, but it was quite enjoyable actually. I was pretty tired, but I enjoyed it, and the sun was out. It wasn't raining, which helped a lot. And I listened to another podcast from Ulrich, or Uber as he's known, who actually won the Tour Divide this year. Crazy German guy, which again kept these ideas of potentially doing it next year bouncing around in my head. So I was listening about riding as I was riding. I guess I'm obsessed, huh? But yeah, there was another nearly 70k after I arrived on that second ferry. So it was a long day, and I didn't get to camp here until about 10:30 tonight. So I was riding, at night for a few hours, although the sun is still very high in the sky, so it didn't really feel like night riding at all, to be honest. It's a great thing about riding here in summer. It's basically you have as much time as you need to get somewhere, which is always awesome. I just had dinner at about 11 o'clock or 11:30 even. So yeah, it's been a day. It's been a fantastic day, and coming into this little town here at about 10:30, there was a little bit of spray coming down from the clouds, but not enough to really get wet, but just enough to display a very perfect rainbow over the lake as I rode, weaving alongside it through these like amazing valleys, lush green grass, people fly fishing in the river, and these like beautiful old Norwegian houses just perched alongside the river as well. It was just a stunning ride, and that descent from that 600 meter climb was just epic. It went for probably 20 minutes coming down. I think I got up to about 70 k's an hour on that descent. It was so good. Tomorrow is another probably big day, probably 100k or so, maybe a bit more, and another 600 meter climb. That will be the main event of the day, I think. And after that, that's basically the last big hill of the trip done. So I'm hoping the rest will be fairly easy after that. But yeah, one more big hill to go. Hopefully it doesn't rain. So I'm going to hit the hay now. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.